So, guys, I want to talk about AEW, and I really think that, we need to actually start rebuilding Ring of Honor. Like, I believe what was going to happen was that they're going to have AEW Shockwave, and what AEW Shockwave was supposed to be was either another developmental show or maybe like, the Ring of Honor show. But the point of it is that Ring of Honor has had no vitality, and it's definitely probably going to be the next show that gets next because you have titles that don't mean anything. It's just a show to feature extra people, and it doesn't really matter. And then also too that when you watch AEW live and go to the live shows, what Tony Khan does is that he actually goes out and he kind of pleads with the audience to stay extra. He even offers his autograph to pose, and do selfies and other things like that. So they honestly are kind of under a desperate plea to make Ring of Honor matter. And it's also sad because I believe like the first time they bought Ring of Honor, they had a pay-per-view that had like maybe over like between 8,000 and 4,000 people. And now their pay-per-views get less than 1,500 people. And, I remember when I was in Texas, they actually had something where if you go to the Ring of Honor tapings, it's like they said like, like you go to one show and then you get like two tickets to other events. So it's like 2 for 3 really. You pay like $60. You're basically going to 2 other shows paying like $22 altogether, doing my Scott Steiner math. But one thing that's actually could save Ring of Honor is having a better World Heavyweight Championship picture. And that's one of the big things that's been hurting the company. There's only Chris Jericho. And when you have somebody like Matt Cardona, that's a bad thing because Matt Cardona, I believe, is now in TNA Wrestling. So it's bad that you're actually just hiring him from another company, really, because you're almost saying, oh, we don't even have people on our roster. We don't even have a good, heavyweight division. We have to hire people from other companies to face our champion. So one thing I've always talked about is Powerhouse Hobbs versus Chris Jericho. And there is a lot of benefits for doing this. That honestly, if you want to sell a pay-per-view, you need to have Powerhouse Hobbs versus Chris Jericho. Because could you imagine the AEW audience feeling that catharsis to see Chris Jericho, somebody who's been annoying and obnoxious, somebody who's been over-featured, lose the Ring of Honor title? Hobbs going through a big gauntlet of people. That could be really, really appealing. So you have the ultimate main event. And then the other thing that you should do is that, with your Ring of Honor show, your Supercard of Honor, because I know they have this every April, is that you need to use that to revitalize your AEW Ring of Honor division. You should have like at least a ladder match, I would say, of maybe 8 people on the roster that could be potential Ring of Honor champions. And then you need to also feature maybe some developmental wrestlers. You need to hire new wrestlers and be like, hey, Ring of Honor matters. Or you take people that are on your roster that are sitting at home and be like, hey, guys, you know what? Here's like 40 people who are sitting at home. You're like, okay, guys, here's like maybe 20 people who should be cut. That we're not going to do anything with them. But here's like 15 or 20 people that can go to Ring of Honor. And the rule is if you don't go to Ring of Honor, or, you're somebody who, has some, who's not even, doesn't have any star power, but you could be somebody one day. You can say something like, hey, it's Ring of Honor or you're fired. So that way you can set up like, a ladder match with a bunch of people that could be Ring of Honor champion one day. You have Shane Taylor in it. You have Commander in it. You have, maybe one of the Von Erichs. You could have like Dax or Cash Wheeler and a couple of other people that could be Ring of Honor champions. And you also kind of establish what the Ring of Honor title is supposed to do. It's supposed to be like the NXT title where you're working to develop somebody. You're working to develop somebody into an AEW champion. And that's kind of the other thing about it is that, so you can use that pay-per-view. You can use that to set up use your next pay-per-view, your next show to really set up a World Heavyweight Championship picture. So if you have like Hobbs and Jericho as a draw, you can have other matches that can actually tell the audience, hey, we're revamping ROH. Here are the stories, here are the feuds, here are the other things. And then also, another big benefit of having Hobbs as the champion is that you can make him a workhorse champion. And what I mean by is you do exactly what Mark Briscoe did, which was like last year he was wrestling on Ring of Honor, and he was also wrestling on AEW Blood and Guts. He was also wrestling on AEW Collision in Texas and all that stuff, really. So it's good when you actually have a wrestler, just it's good when you actually have a wrestler and then they are featured on both brands. You're saying, hey, look at this champion here, look at the Ring of Honor champion. They get like double duty, really. Hey, you look at somebody like Mark Briscoe. He did that last year. Mark Briscoe should be facing Jon Moxley in a match, this year. So I think that, that's so that way you kind of show to the audience, hey, if you wrestle in Ring of Honor, you hold the Ring of Honor title, you eventually could be a future AEW champion. And then you can even do a pay-per-view like Death Before Dishonor or another like special show where you do like what they did in TNA Wrestling, like the X Division show, where you can do the Ring of Honor champion versus the AEW champion. So the person becomes a double champion, or you do something where it's like you give up the Ring of Honor championship to face the champion, all in, all out type of thing. So if you give Hobbs the championship, he'll be in that picture of being that, workhorse type of champion. And then you'll be like, hey, look at this Powerhouse Hobbs guy. He actually is a big, bad, legitimate threat. You look at what he's doing in Ring of Honor. He squashes people. He has great matches. He talks on the microphone. He acts like a big deal. And then also you see him on AEW Dynamite. You're like, damn, this guy has something. You do Ring of Honor title, Hobbs versus Bobby Lashley at All In. People would want to see that. And then you have him on, on a Death Before Dishonor, Hobbs versus Lashley, or maybe Hobbs versus Shelton or something like that. There's so many things that you can do. If you give Hobbs the title and then you give him a championship reign, all the other matches and all the other things. And I also will say that I think the other thing that I'll say as a good point is that also with Hobbs, a lot of people are going to talk about this. They're going to be like, wow, that's really amazing that Hobbs is holding this title. It's something new and different. It's not just the Chris Jericho title, because I think he's been the Ring of Honor champion, about like 3 times, really. So it's almost like, where are you going to go with this? The other problem, so, you take the title off of Chris Jericho, because it's almost like, if he's not really been drawing, if he's going to continue that, like that rock star asshole type of wrestler, and that's not drawing a crowd, that's just him to be him, really. It gets to a point where it's like, why should we continue on with this? Why should we continue on with this? This really, really needs to, have an ending, really. So that's all I have to say about that. And then the next thing that I would say is you have to be careful of your next champion. Like there is a hint that it's going to be Jeff Jarrett. So if you do Jeff Jarrett versus Chris Jericho, that's going to be a bad match, because it's like, what does Jeff Jarrett have to offer? This is another way of getting him another title so he gets closer to the Ric Flair. Woo! Sorry, that was a bad one. I had a bit of a cough. Woo! Ric Flair, woo! Woo! Reign and all that, really. Or you do something like you're trying to make him like the Triple H and get him close to like Triple H's 14 reign. And I believe Sting had 14 titles, so you're trying to give Jeff Jarrett one more, really. But Jeff Jarrett's not going to be that great of a champion. And it looks like they're abandoning the Jeff Jarrett and the MJF rivalry. I don't think they even had a match with each other, if I'm correct, really. So, well, this guy who you're abandoning a rivalry with, you are actually going to have him be a Ring of Honor champion. No, I would rather have Powerhouse Hobbs, a young star, somebody who can appeal and has vitality. Imagine if you have Powerhouse Hobbs versus Samoa Joe for the Ring of Honor title. Would that draw money, or would Jeff Jarrett versus or Big Cass versus Powerhouse Hobbs for the Ring of Honor title, would that draw money, or would Jeff Jarrett versus Hobbs, or Jeff Jarrett versus Dustin, or Jeff Jarrett versus Chris Jericho, then Jeff Jericho versus Chris Jericho in a rematch, or Jeff Jarrett versus Big Cass or Powerhouse Hobbs or whatever? That does not, or Jay Lethal, that's not going to draw money with Jeff Jarrett on top. And then the other person is Dustin Rhodes. Like, I like Dustin Rhodes. I think there's a hero's journey in a match with Dustin Rhodes winning the ROH title from Chris Jericho. But the problem is who's going to beat Dustin? Because you can't do something like have him, have a match with Powerhouse Hobbs, because the problem is Powerhouse Hobbs is the big powerlifting type of wrestler. The guy looks like a mix of, he looks like an angrier version of Big E, really. You cannot have Powerhouse Hobbs and Dustin Rhodes in a match. A guy who's in his mid-50s versus a guy who's, I think, like in his late 20s, and he's very muscular. And then you're going to be like, you're going to have a 50-50 match between those. No, then you're going to make Hobbs look weak. And then the other thing is, once we do Samoa Joe versus Dustin, that's going to look bad as well, because he's a heavy lifter. You would have to do something like you'd have to do Dustin versus Sammy Guevara. Sammy Guevara low blows him, becomes the heel, and then you have Powerhouse Hobbs squash him, then he becomes the champion, really. That would be the way to do it. But yeah, that's also another issue, because it could be Dustin as the next champion. And then I think the other issue is that, you could do something really random. You can say, hey, we'll go back to Mark Briscoe. You've been there already. Hey, we're going to give it, to, Samoa Joe. You've been there during Ring of Honor, in the 2000s or whatever, really. Or you give it to Bryan Danielson or something like that. You have to do something where you have to give it to a champion that actually means something, that's actually new and different. And that's going to say, hey, it's going to be like a developmental brand. The titles are going to matter this time. So the best person to do that is Powerhouse Hobbs. And that's kind of like the other thing that I'll say. And I know I'll repeat myself a little bit, is you have a lot of dream matches. Powerhouse Hobbs versus Shane Taylor. Powerhouse Hobbs versus Big Cass. Powerhouse Hobbs versus Samoa Joe. Powerhouse Hobbs versus Bryan Danielson. Powerhouse Hobbs versus maybe Luchasaurus if he comes back. Powerhouse Hobbs, versus Bobby Lashley could be something for the Ring of Honor title. Powerhouse Hobbs versus Mark Briscoe. Powerhouse Hobbs versus Christian. Could be something as well, really. You could have other there are other wrestlers on the roster that are bigger men, like Powerhouse Hobbs versus Lance Archer, or Powerhouse Hobbs versus Brian Cage, and that's also a good look. Those are good dream matches. And then the other thing that I'll say is that you have a big man wrestler holding a world title. The reason why that's good is because with AEW, every AEW champion has not been a big man wrestler. They've been the biggest person they've had is Samoa Joe, but Samoa Joe has not done feat of strengths or anything like that. You need to have a big man wrestler. Otherwise, the show looks stupid. Moxley, who would win in a real fight? Moxley or Powerhouse Hobbs? Who would win a real fight? Old man Chris Jericho or Powerhouse Hobbs. MJF versus Powerhouse Hobbs. Who would actually win in a real fight? Adam Page, CM Punk, Bryan Danielson. They're all twigs compared to Powerhouse Hobbs. So you really are setting up, a big man wrestler. And like I've said, imagine if you had Miro. Imagine if you, had, Brian Cage actually not lose all the time. You need to establish some realism, and that would actually be good for AEW. Wardlow versus Powerhouse Hobbs. What happens if we had Wardlow a champion? He's a more legitimate champion than all the other people that you had, because a big man, a big, strong, muscular guy that's very athletic and has agility, that makes a good champion. You could even that could even be a dream match: Powerhouse Hobbs versus Wardlow. Big man slapping man meat type of match, really. So there are a lot of things that you can do with Powerhouse Hobbs being the champion, with the AEW ROH Championship. I think the time for Chris Jericho to move on is really the big thing. And then the other thing that I'll say is that Chris Jericho needs a break. He could do once in a while matches, but the problem is that you can set up, Brian Keith and Big Cass as a tag team in Ring of Honor, and that's the best thing, or even on the AEW roster, to avenge Chris Jericho. And then also too, if you make Hobbs the ROH champion, Big Bill versus Powerhouse Hobbs would be a really great match for AEW, for ROH television. And then Chris Jericho needs a break. We need a break from Chris Jericho, because the other thing too is that you overfeature him, see what the show's like without him for a while, give him a few months off. He also deserves a break because he's been there. I don't think he's ever taken time off, really. So it would be good to kind of just be like, hey man, have a bit of a vacation. We'll bring you back for All In. And, you can have a match with Hobbs, or you can be in the Dynamite gauntlet, or you can face maybe Daniel Garcia for the TNT Championship. And that would be a really great match, really. That would be a good feud. So that's also, and that'll be another point that I'll bring up, that it would put Chris Jericho in other feuds and stories. Like as I said, him versus Dan Garcia would be a great match. Chris Jericho versus Okada could be a great match. Chris Jericho, versus Speedball, Mike Bailey, or Swerve Strickland, or somebody else, really. So you need to kind of do something where he's out of the Ring of Honor title. There's so many things that you can do with him. So, for a lot of positives, having Powerhouse Hobbs versus Chris Jericho, Powerhouse Hobbs become the new ROH champion is really best for business. There's a lot more positives. It's an experimental creative direction. It's an experimental step forward for AEW. They need to take that risk, really, because if not, you know, it's just going to be nothing. And then one day, you know, the executives are going to call and be like, hey, we got to pull ROH. Or Tony's going to be like, hey, ROH is not making me a lot of money. You know, it's either I get cut off from Shad's money or we cut off ROH, really. So make ROH matter. And one of the biggest things you do is make Powerhouse Hobbs the champion of that company. You make Supercard of Honor a show that people want to see. You reestablish all your divisions, and you do some revamping. So Powerhouse Hobbs versus Jericho for the ROH title would be the draw, and then having Hobbs beat him would be the way to draw a crowd. So hopefully AEW is smart enough to do that. But I definitely advocate my point. Bitches.